Howdy, folks, and welcome to your storm chasing forecast show for Tuesday, June 9th. I am Gabriel Harber, and I'm joined here by Coach Cameron Nixon. Cameron, how you doing?
Hello, I'm good. How are you? Good.
I'm doing wonderful, man, and I see you
Awesome.
are looking bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. I'm guessing that means you did not get out and storm chase.
That is correct. Yeah. Something just rubbed me the wrong way when I woke up, and I'm so glad that everyone had a fun time in Denver. I know a lot of people had a blast chasing that.
Before we go any further, I want to remind folks that what you are looking at on your screen right now with the SPC Outlook and stuff, that is the Weatherfront browser app. It's connected to the subscription you get on your mobile device. So if you've been holding out, I'm sure you've heard about Weatherfront, but you haven't actually made the purchase yet, you haven't taken the dive, definitely time to give that 7-day free trial a chance, kick the tires, link in the description. So, Cameron, before we move on to some actual analysis for today, looking at the models, I think you said there was something you wanted to pull up with pivotal weather, right? We pitch
Yeah.
Weatherfront and then we immediately go over to pivotal weather. So,
Yes, I have a feeling that this will be only temporary until Weatherfront can give us our beloved hodograph maps. But I want to just give an eagle-eye view of why this setup today is truly impressive. We have upwards of 4,000 CAPE across a very large warm sector in the Dakotas, into even Iowa and Minnesota and Nebraska, even into Canada. Really broad warm sector where you see these sickle-shaped photographs. And if you're just a layman and you walked up to this, you'd be thinking this really might be a generational tornado outbreak for this area. But as we're going to find out, I'm going to break down why this probably is not going to be the case. The devil's going to be in a lot of these details.
I love how you throw cold water on it before we even get started so everybody can click off on YouTube. We should have
Yeah.
definitely discussed this in the pre-show planning. But I kid, it is funny because in the group chat we have for all the coaches that are game for doing forecast shows on occasion, you guys
Yeah.
were all poo-pooing this event before we even started.
Yes, I think that's cause to continue watching too, because you might not agree with us. So,
Absolutely. So I would like to start off by taking a look at the tornado probabilities because since
yeah.
we've begun doing these forecast shows semi regularly, I don't know if we've had any of the conditional intensity groups to talk about. And those dotted lines that people see in the middle of the tornadoes and wind and hail probabilities, what do those mean exactly?
Yes. Okay. So as you probably know, the probabilities, a 2, 5, 10 is your likelihood of getting a tornado, while these hatchings are the potential intensity of these tornadoes. And it is frequently communicated as a kind of reasonable max. So out of today, what is the reasonable max rating that you could potentially get out of this? And for Sig 1, that is roughly an EF2. It goes a lot deeper than that though, and I'll spare you some of that, the intricacies, but really it depends on the distribution of tornadoes. Are we getting more, a larger fraction of EF2 and you have even EF3 and 4 tornadoes than normal? As we go into Sig 2 and Sig 3, we have a much larger fraction of significant tornadoes than we typically do. And so today, and I want to dispel some myths in that a big one intensity, this is not the end of the world. This is actually quite common. This generally means that about 1 in 5 tornadoes could be EF2 and greater. And so that means they're expecting most of their tornadoes to be weak, with some EF2 and greater tornadoes possible.
Great explanation. And without getting into those details you talked about, would a decent heuristic for people who are at home making their forecasts be if you start to see the SIG ticking up from 1 to 2, from 2 to 3, maybe that is a sign to pay a little more attention to the forecast, maybe think a little bit more about your plan because you might be walking into a situation that's a little more dangerous, a little more explosive than otherwise.
Yes, that is exactly the point. SPC is trying to reserve these SIG 2s and SIG 3s for truly impactful events where you might be primarily dealing with a much larger fraction of significant tornadoes than you're used to. Your SIG 2s and your SIG 3s, you have a very high probability of those strong tornadoes.
I like that as well and how it pairs up with the the theme that we have here at Storm Chaser Coaching of teaching people how to chase safely and successfully, because I think it
Yes.
also gives you the ability to decide for yourself how close do I want to try and get on this given day. If they're going to be lower end tornadoes, maybe I can afford to get within a half a mile, a quarter mile without feeling like I'm out of my depth. But like you said, on a
Sure.
conditional 2 or even a conditional 3 day, maybe you decide to play it a little safer, stay a little further downstream to the southeast, and really not
Yeah.
put yourself in a position to have something negative occur.
Yeah. I like your read on that.
Okay, so let's get into the nitty gritty, Cameron. The first one you wanted to talk about was the Dakota windbag. Obviously, that's where all the bright colors are on the SPC Outlook, so I
Yes.
think a lot of people will be eyes drawn to that to begin with. Why are you thinking this is not going to exactly play out the way people think it is?
Yeah, let's go back and again admire how significant of a severe weather setup this is. Just because you're a chaser doesn't mean that this couldn't pan out in a really significant fashion. We have a very strong trough here, even has a bit of negative tilt to it. Really just a long wave trough, a kind of an extension of that Pacific jet extension. And so we have this piece of energy breaking off. I have a love-hate relationship with people who say energy breaking off a jet, but I just said it myself. So you have this. I don't know if you'd call it a shortwave, but just some jet energy breaking off in the Dakotas here earlier on in the later on in the afternoon. If you go down a little bit though, you can see a little bit more detail in our 700 flow, where you have this kind of shortwave here over Wyoming early on in the day. So early this morning, really impinging on this area in the later morning, 10, 11, 12 o'clock. And so I am a little bit concerned for a chasing perspective that this is pretty early, right? We're already setting ourselves up for a potential failure mode in long track supercells because anytime you get that early initiation, there's a lot of things that can go wrong. So again, we're setting the stage for that early initiation. I'll throw up our surface pattern, which is going to go nuts as that jet stream approaches. We've got this very strong low pressure center over eastern Montana, western Dakotas, to that really enhanced wind field here. It's going to be windy, really windy. You could maybe see a secondary low forming over the northeast Colorado, southwest Nebraska region. And so when it comes to features around here, you're dealing with some semblance of a warm front. You can see our winds calm considerably as we go into Minnesota, as we lift our low pressure center northward. And then we just have this broad region of kind of drier but still warm air. I would almost classify this as like a Pacific front, where it's the dry line, not. And if you know anything about Pacific fronts, these often accompany these really damaging wind events. So this is already something that's keying me into the potential for this being a widespread wind bag. So I'll throw up some dew points here too, and we can see that early on in the period, even though we were sporting our 4,000, 5,000 cape early on, where we see that shortwave nosing in, right at around 16, 17Z, we don't have these 70-degree dew points. So I'll get there. I'll get there. We can pluck a sounding here around the time where I expect convective activity to start getting going. And this is what we got. We got very dry air here, and we have relatively weak shear. We have strong flow, right? We have really strong winds at 700 and above, but we have generally strong flow. I can throw up some cape here, and maybe we can pluck around and see any areas that are very favorable for initiation. So again, I'm plucking this just around noon local time, and we have very minimal sin, and again, weak shear. But we're going to have very strong forcing along this kind of Pacific front here. We're going to have really strong convergence. You see how fast our dry line mixes east into the Dakotas here. Would not surprise me to see that initiation by 18, 19Z. So, if you are a fan of supercells, this might not be the region for you. And I'm circling all of the Dakotas here. I definitely think that supercells are possible, especially later, but the stage is set for a squall line to initiate relatively early across the western Dakotas. Gabe mentioned the famous D word. And I have to say that SPC has actually redid their definition of a derecho. I'm going to totally well actually you on this. Something like this might not actually be classified as a derecho anymore. I know that might disappoint a lot of people. We can all have our own opinions, but they will classify this as a damaging long-lived squall line, whereas we're reserving derecho for these kind of bow echo compact MCSs. So while it could be a really damaging wind event, it likely will not be classified as a derecho.
That's disappointing.
Yep.
Long-lived
Sorry.
wind event just doesn't have the same ring to it as Derecho.
Yeah, if you went all the way up to the Dakotas to cover the next big derecho, I have news for you. I told you I'm going to be a buzzkill tonight. But yeah, let's look at this some more ways. Let's actually look at wind shear as it evolves over the course of the day. And 16, 17, 18Z, we really don't have much of these colors, right? We have generally weak shear here where we expect convection initiation. So again, that's going to be ripe for kind of these more popcorny weak convection that's hauling it with that 700 millibar flow. Then you get these downdraft generations, and then you form a much larger squall line, which is really unfortunate because as we saw here, later on in the day, and maybe I'll scooch closer toward convection initiation, you could see the disparity in photographs, right? We're initiating here with our weak kind of multi-cell shear here, where, an ideal chaser world, we would be initiating here where these massive kind of meat hook shaped photographs are. So that's just not happening today. Very likely not to happen. But of course, one outcome that is likely going to happen is that we initiate this kind of large scale squall line and it moves into these curved photographs later on in the afternoon. And so we could pluck some soundings around in Weatherfront as the shear kind of increases in this area in the eastern Dakotas. And so if you happen to be staging further north northeast, obviously this looks like a great tornadic environment. It's just what is our mode going to look like? Are we going to have semi-discrete elements in here? You could get some awesome structure with any leading shelf cloud and potentially some mesovortices, but definitely will probably be a fast-paced, fast-moving, and potentially dangerous chase if you keep following it up here.
All right, so that was a lot of negativity, but I'm going to give you a chance to redeem yourself here. Give me one hopeful thing. How would I know if those storms were going to start to fire a little further to the east in an area with better photographs?
Yeah, so that's a great question because I've seen a faint glimmer of hope. And when I say faint, faint, from some of our cams, and I think in particular the RFS. So we can see as we go forward, and I'll show more cams later, that we might actually get some initiation along the warm front heading into eastern Dakotas and Minnesota. You see some semblances of supercells here. I don't think we go out far enough. But, spoiler, couple cam runs did show some kind of isolated convection along this warm front here. Our biggest problem, though, is going to be what we saw earlier, in that we really have a strong cap in this area and lots of dry air. So if I pluck the sounding again, it's really you're teetering on the edge of favorability here. You might not have as much of a cap in this specific sounding, but you still have that stout EML and lots of dry air here. So it's very possible that we don't have the surface conversions or kind of the thermo profile to support convection initiation. But if I were anywhere, I would definitely be along and east of this warm front.
We have created something very cool for all of you. On the screen right now, you see it says Get Storm Chasing Recaps. If you would like to have yesterday's storm chasing action delivered to your inbox every morning before you wake up, so it's right there for you when you have a cup of coffee, when you're getting ready for work, just go ahead and click the link in the description below, fill out the information, get Storm Chasing Recaps delivered to your inbox every single morning. Now, what about our folks who are up to the north? Maybe they're still hanging
Yes.
out from a couple of days ago. Maybe they just don't want to mess around with all these potential failure modes that you were just talking about. Give me the rundown on the Canada Hero play.
Yeah, and so I think I'm glad you mentioned that here. I think if there were any areas that you are most likely to initiate along this warm front, it is probably going to be further up north, maybe extreme northeast North Dakota, even into Canada. And so I'll pluck a couple soundings here and hopefully prove my point and see you have much more saturated air here. You're starting with these ridiculous low-level shear photographs here, and you still have lots of cape. So it is possible that you do have enough kind of mid-level saturation and convection to get convective storms to fire all the way up here. And we can pull up our surface winds just to see if we actually have enhanced convergence. And generally, as we approach into Canada, you see that kind of cyclonic curvature in these winds. Let's see if I could throw up a 3 cape, and that could give us some regions of interest. Yeah, so just broadly along the international border here, we do have these better, stronger low-level cape profiles that I think are going to be a little bit more conducive for supercell genesis. And maybe as opposed to further south along that warm front, where you get something that's more dry loft. Again, really, we could get storms anywhere up and down this warm front here, but it would very likely be east of Jamestown, Aberdeen, maybe even Sioux Falls, that we get these discrete supercells to fire.
Is it often we see a warm front with that sort of orientation?
Probably not. And I'm hoping I'm not like miscategorizing this, but I would definitely consider this a warm front. I think a lot of the you have more. I could throw up this pivotal map
No,
again.
I definitely don't think you're, because from what I remember reading, it was talking about a like northwest to southeast oriented warm front all the way down into like the
Oh, they
mid
said that in
Mississippi
SBC.
Valley.
Yeah,
So,
and that's essentially what we have. You could see the hallmark of being north of a warm front, or in this case, east of a warm front, are these sickle-shaped photographs because that means veering. So yeah, you're exactly right. I think this is pretty uncommon.
all right. So now we have our final boss, the Nebraska hipster play. What are we thinking about for the folks who are probably still hanging out around Colorado, Nebraska Panhandle area?
Yeah, let's hit two birds with one stone, and we can just look at some cam guidance for across this area. As we saw earlier, the bulk of our kind of strong forcing, our upper level forcing, is going to be in the Dakotas, which is why I think convection is going to be most ubiquitous up here. Where we get a little bit weaker is down in Nebraska, and we still have similarly robust cape, especially later this afternoon. So this region kind of interests me. The one issue that I could see for potential initiating storms is it gets pretty dry down here. Again, we're away from kind of the main forcing and our lift, which generally yields these deeper moisture profiles. We have something a little bit more like this. But part of me inside really wonders if this might actually help us because we're going to have strong near surface forcing. You can see later on we have a lot of strong convergence here too at the surface. We just have less upper level support. So it's possible we do try to initiate more discrete storms down here that at least survive a little bit longer before becoming the blob. So I'll throw the her out all the way up to this period, and we can see what I mean by this. Looks like we have a little bit of discrete activity in South Dakota until it grows upscale. We have a couple attempts at stuff in Nebraska. Of course, this is the herd. The herd does not like initiating in dry air masses. But then we go all the way up here, and you can see the massive squall line that forms rather early here, and the potential for discrete supercells up here in Canada along that warm front. We could do the RFS, similar story. All that convection initiates early, forms largely a squall line. You could see these U8 swaths up and down the squall line, which are likely embedded mesovortices. And keep in mind, this is going to be a very intense wind event throughout all of North Dakota and portions of northern South Dakota. See some semblance of supercells up here. These might actually be north of the warm front. And then RFS is not particularly liking any discrete development down here in Nebraska. It just is too dry. Maybe I'll do some NAM because NAM will probably give us a slightly more upper echelon scenario if you're chasing. Again, throughout North and South Dakota, you have rather immediate upscale growth early on into this giant windbag here. And then you have these kind of embedded rotating parts within it. Not too much warm front development, except for if you go down into Nebraska. You do have some fairly discrete things here that you might be able to call supercells. If you're chasing Colorado, this might be a good target for you. Otherwise, I would save your gas.
Remember to check out those links in the description below, and then watch another video.